what we could do, if you're comfortable, is let me take you through a little bit of thought leadership around Workforce of the Future. And then I definitely will leave time, for some discussion and questions, around how this is applicable to your own organization and what some of the considerations need to be for you going forward. And please feel free at any time when I'm working through the slides just to stop me and ask me a question. And maybe it's just a little bit of background noise. Maybe we could just go and mute if you're not talking. I think sometimes just with the networks are all struggling. And then Mimi, I can't see the chat functionality. So if there's anything in there, won't you just alert me to that if you don't mind? So I think that if we just look at Workforce of the Future, this is something that PwC has been working on for a number of years. I'd say at least over the last 20 years, and obviously over time it has ramped up. I've been actively involved in Workforce of the Future since 2017. And I must say what's been quite interesting is that, when we've been talking to clients prior to the pandemic around the future of work, I think a lot of people thought that, it sounded believable and credible and all of that, but they didn't think that that was going to be part of their reality in the near future. And of course, we just needed the pandemic to sweep through the world to show us that actually our ways of working had to change dramatically. And I think the whole thing that, we are potentially all online here, some of us at home, some of us in the office, I think has just changed the way that we're doing business. And I would imagine that, that change has been evident in your own organization as well. So what I wanted to just talk to you about this afternoon was looking at three real areas, and that's around what does the future of work look like from our perspective? What does that mean in terms of the type of workforce that you need to have if that's what work is going to look like? And then also touching on, so what does that mean for the HR function? So if we go through, and have a look what's happening in our broader environment, I think the pressure on productivity has been, I think, for people in Africa, an ongoing challenge. And obviously now with automation coming in, we've run into a scenario where even before we got into COVID, the ability to have the right skills in the right place at the right time was a challenge for all organizations. And in my discussions with the Namibian team was also around, and even more so in Namibia, where you may not have local people that have got all the skills that are required. So you're facing if you say like a double whammy in terms of, trying to make sure that you can get the right skills in place. I think we know, and we have a look at that figure of, 3 trillion rand spent in tech investment in each of the last 3 years. We've got a high number of jobs that are at risk of being displaced by automation, and if not displaced, then they could also be augmented by automation and technology. 77% of workers, the good news is that they are keen and wanting to learn new skills and to get retrained in order to remain employable going forward. And then if we just look at it from a CEO's point of view, I think that really is something that is keeping CEOs awake in terms of they're saying that they know that they don't necessarily have the skills that they need to push the organization forward. They also know that they can't necessarily go out into the market with a checkbook and find those skills. So the first priority is really around you as an organization developing your own people in order to get them future fit and ready for the future. And that is often we think about it only from a technical perspective, but actually the soft skills are becoming the hard skills, and as well as the whole issue around digital savvy and digital fitness. And I think that most CEOs are saying that they're not seeing sufficient progress of the development of those skills to keep pace with where the business is going and where the business is pushing to. So we embarked on this, our New World New Skills program, and it really is made up of 3 components. And this was in place, as I said, from 2017. This was sort of what the structure looked like. But it really was around saying that we think there are 3 areas that we have to look at. So we've got a call to action, which is really around making sure that we are shaping what is going on in the broader environment and having the important discussions with government, etc. There's a need to be contributing in terms of that societal impact. We know in all countries, especially in the African environment, around high levels of unemployment, and that's not going to get fixed by government on its own. So there's a need for a contribute component. And then obviously from our perspective, it's also around saying, so how do we build business solutions around this whole need to upskill people and equip businesses to be able to succeed in the future. So the three focus areas that we've really narrowed it down to is around, then I'm going to talk to you about today, is around the future of work, the future of the workforce, and then, where does that leave HR and how does HR need to respond according to that? And I think that if we just have a look at this future of work, it's going to have an impact on the types of leaders that we're going to need, and we're going to have different ways of working and different ways and patterns of behaviors within the organization. Also, that we've got to really have a look at how can we use technology to work out which jobs are going to be impacted and which are not, and how do you build a plan around making sure that you do have the right skills in place. And then I think thirdly, the issue around HR in terms of, as the business strategy is changing, so HR needs to change its strategy as well, and designing different ways of engaging and business processes that are going to help us to drive success. So an example of that might be when everyone was in the office and you could do face-to-face performance management, for example. That was one thing. Now you're having to manage people's performance remotely. You're not having that face-to-face contact, and it's around how is HR evolving to take into account these new ways of working. So those are the three areas, and I just thought it would be useful for us just to have a look at each one of them in a little bit more detail. So what we're seeing a lot is that organizations are having to become a lot more agile in terms of the way that they go to market and the way that they are dealing with their customers. So it's about doing things faster. It's about being able to bring down the costs, and particularly at this time, and then also at the same time making sure that in this sort of fast-paced, very customer-centric environment, we've got to make sure that our workforce is engaged, because if they're not engaged, the chances that your customers are going to have a good experience is virtually nothing. So I think that, the legacy that we come in with is something around, a matrix organization, which a lot of organizations, in the past have had that kind of an organizational structure. And it was very much about sort of cross-functional collaboration, etc. And where we're moving to from organizational design now is starting to look at enterprise agility. And that's the ability to be able to work in those cross-functional teams that were part of the matrix environments, but where teams sort of come together very quickly, work on an issue, and then disband, and then go off to the next project, etc., that they're working on. And very much a flatter hierarchy than we have seen in the past. So, if we have a look at the reason that we are looking at this, these agile type organizations, is very much around the agility that's required everywhere. So customers are wanting, they know what they want, they're becoming more demanding, and they're wanting to have more and more feedback, for example. If we have a look at it from, the business performance is also around, there's a lot more need for you to be able to react quicker, to have a deeper understanding of what your customers are wanting, and making sure that you've got a consistency of that customer experience across the business. And then we talk about the third one, which is really the employee engagement. And that's around how do we empower people that they are going to drive the change, embrace the change, be able to make decisions, and how do we start to upskill people that they don't only know about their own area of expertise, but they have the ability to move across those functional barriers. And I think, also just if we look at the whole concept of innovation, is that, the problems are becoming more more complex. The solutions are not as obvious as they have been in the past. And so that whole issue of collaboration is really important. So it's very much a dynamic type of organizational structure that we are seeing. And that's obviously, driving the success of the organization. So organizational structure, definitely something that you've got to have a look at. I think also what we're seeing is the traditional team, which you can have a look at, obviously, what those sort of design principles looked like, and starting to have a look at what does an agile team look like. So it's often about, those teams that are coming together and disbanding, and obviously lots much faster turnaround in terms of that. And then we're also looking at agile functions, and as well as the whole agile organization. So the ability of the culture to align to how do we work, what are the behaviors that we have in an agile organization, also enables you to respond better to the market. You can move faster, quicker than you have before, but it does mean that there's obviously a whole lot of other things that need to be in place, which is around the trust in the organization and people with the right skills in the right jobs. So I think you're going to hear me talk quite a lot today around, experiences, and experience does influence what we do and how we do it. So what we are putting across is to say, if you have a positive experience, it's going to result in motivated employees, which are going to connect with your customers, and we're looking for leaders that are going to energize. And what we're finding is that companies that are investing in this experience also need to be able to measure what the return on investment is in that experience. So we talk about something called ROX, which we talk about, it's called the return on experience. And that experience, I think traditionally we've also always only looked at it through the customer lens. But now what we're saying is that we need to start looking through through more lenses than just the customer. And where we see that is going to drive value is it's going to give you faster feedback, deeper insights, and it's going to enable you to start making operational changes. So the business is going to be more agile, more intelligent, and more customer-centric because you're making decisions based on fact. So when we talk about this return on experience, we talk about that there's three components. That it's around what is the leadership experience. So in other words, how do I experience my leader times the employee experience, which is, do I feel a pride in the organization, and do I feel connected to the culture? And then ultimately, what is the customer experience? And if we can get all three of those right, then what we're saying is you're going to have a return on your investment and return on your experience. So you're going to have happy customers, happy employees, happy leaders, because the happy leaders are going to have employees who are doing what they need to do, and the overall success of the organization is going to be there for the benefit of all. So it also is around looking at some metrics around, how do you measure that, and how do you take the learnings that come out of those feedback loops and start to improve that customer experience and the employee experience, because that is what's going to make your business sustainable going forward. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of is around the whole concept of well-being. And if we're looking to have an organization that has a high-performing culture, there we're saying that well-being is becoming more important. And actually, interestingly, it's got two components. So the well-being is the well-being of the employee, okay, which is made up of those various components. But there's also about the well-being of the organization. And it's about trying to pull those two together. So if we focus on the well-being of the individual, as well as the well-being of the organization, of purpose, and there's a great culture, and our reward is where it should be, and our leadership experience is fantastic. What we're saying is that that's going to result in an employee base that's going to be more engaged, better productivity. They're going to want to come to work in the morning. They're going to want to stay there because it's a great place to be, and it's really going to boost the morale. So HR plays quite an important role here in terms of almost being the glue that holds those two sometimes conflicting things together and make sure that they look after both the employee as well as the organization, to ensure that we are going to have that engaged, productive workforce. So well-being, I think historically we often spoke about wellness, which was around, do you have a medical aid and do you have retirement funding, etc. And you can see that well-being is made up of a lot more components than that. The other trend that we're seeing is really around workplace analytics. So if you are wanting to drive this type of process and you're wanting to understand the organization and the employee experience and the customer focus, it's got to be done by data-driven solutions. So the days of saying, I think I want to let's do this leadership program because we think it's a good idea, it's moving away from that, and it's really understanding how we can pull all of those components together, but in a way that we are measuring what the impact is of what we're doing. And I'll share with you a little bit later some of those analytics that we believe are going to empower people and are going to really enable the capacity and the delivery of the organization. So that's a little bit around the future of work and the way that work is changing and where we see that is going. The second part of it is around, so what does this future workforce look like? Because if that's what our reality is looking like at work, and that the customer is more important, the employee is more important in terms of their experience, the leaders of your organization have to be delivering something different, then what does that mean for the workforce? In other words, the people that are going to show up every day. And I think that what we're seeing from COVID in terms of a workforce and a skills response is, I think the first thing was that organizations focused on repair. So it was really around coming through the pandemic, let's say the hard lockdown, and just making sure that the business was actually viable and could continue. And from there, it really goes into, rethinking about, what could this business be to play in the future? And then obviously, if that's where we want to play, then how do we reconfigure it in terms of that? So we know that businesses are facing challenges around liquidity and supply chain and customers and economics and buying power, etc. And I know that your organization operates across quite a wide range of industries and service offerings. But there are a lot of challenges in the big business environment. And on the other side, it's also around saying, optimizing of costs and productivity and international competition, risk and regulation is something that's becoming more and more of a feature. So those are some of the business challenges. And then, so what does that mean for the workforce? Is that, and we talk here about protecting the workforce, and we say that you can't protect jobs going forward in this new world of work, but what you do have an obligation to do is to protect people. And how does one go about that? And that's starting to look at the whole issue around upskilling. I think some of the other challenges are around policies and practices, workforce costs, redeploying and reskilling of workers, making sure that your productivity is still there, cross-border working issues, et cetera, and I think very much around pressure from senior leaders to say, how can we optimize the workforce? How do we manage the people costs? And then very importantly, how do we make sure that we're able to attract and retain the key talent that are going to be able to deliver the new strategy? Because I think a lot of organizations have come out of COVID starting to have a look at, well, maybe they've landed up in new businesses and new industries, and they're starting to need to have new strategies to be able to deliver and keep the business sustainable. So that again is going to create an issue around having the right people. So where we see the real thing that's falling apart is that that's what's happening in the broader environment. Everyone in your organization knows it's tough out there, and everyone who's working for you also knows that these points must be on the agenda of leadership in terms of productivity, job retention, automation, etc. So what we're saying is that where there's really an important role to play is around having purpose-led communication, is around talking to your people and having a narrative around, this is what our reality looks like, this is what we're going to do about it, and really getting your leaders engaged to be the people that are going to drive that sort of purpose that you need to have within the organization. So some of those upskilling and reskilling priorities that we're seeing is very much around rapidly having to reskill people. So where jobs have trained dramatically, there's not 5 years now to go and get people retrained. And there may be new roles in your organization that didn't exist prior to COVID. And how equipped are you for that? Remote working. And how do I lead and drive productivity in a remote working environment? So I'm not sure what your transition was to working remotely when you had to go there. And I know in a manufacturing environment, it's not always easy to be able to take everybody home. But, how smooth was that for you? And then what does your new reality look like? Is it a hybrid that people are coming back to work? Are you going to have some roles that are going to remain remote all the time? And what some of our clients have been sharing with us when they've got some people at home and some people needing to be on a factory floor or in production is that they're starting to have issues around culture and a little bit of conflict where some people are feeling that they are, there's sort of the us and them starting to develop. So the upskilling programs are really starting to become more and more critical. It's got to be accelerated, and also having a look at, what are those skills that you're going to need for the future, and what are those leadership skills that you're going to need that you maybe didn't have to really focus on before. So if we start looking at things like resilience, innovation, creativity, design thinking, etc., those are all issues in terms of the future skills that we're requiring, and even the way that you develop you present your learning and development. If you haven't got everybody sitting in one place, that can also change. So we've got to go back and re-look at our learning and development programs and how we're doing them and how effective are they, etc., etc. So, there's a number of challenges if we have a look at it from a workforce perspective. I suppose what needs to happen is that you also need to have a look at your industry and your business, and you've really got to start to prioritize. So in your environment, what is going to have the biggest impact on your people, and then what do you need to go and do about it? Because I think one can feel quite paralyzed in terms of there's so much to do, and where do I start? And how do I make sure that I'm not just doing a little bit of everything, but I'm actually working on the things that are going to make a difference to the organization. Is the impact of technology the same in all parts of your business? And again, very much around, do you get a thumbs up as a culture and a people experience of, that's an organization, I want to work for ONL because that's the type of organization that resonates with me. So, how attractive is that culture and that people experience that you currently have? So very much around trying to set some priorities. We just had a look in one of our studies around, so where are the jobs that are going to be disrupted? Which are the ones that are going to be in high demand? And which are the ones that are emerging? And I wanted to say to you that this is a list that's continually changing, and that emerging side is going to be that's growing on a monthly basis. But if we have a look at the roles that have been the most disrupted, finance, operations, procurement, and actual technology itself. So just think about your own banking experience, how that has changed over the last few years. If you look at it from a procurement perspective, even operations on a production floor, how those roles have really, really been quite significantly disrupted. And then if we have a look at what are the jobs that are going to be in high demand, so if you have children making career choices, these are the careers that you want to push them into. So analytics, I mean, I think back to when I started in HR, we certainly didn't have any data analysts that were sitting in an HR function. That's becoming very common now. Cyber innovation, marketing, which you might say that's a strange one to be in high demand. But if you just have a look at how marketing is changing in terms of, how much shopping did you do online before lockdown and how much shopping do you do online now? And that's having a big impact in terms of how marketing functions are needing to change. Obviously, risk and vendor management. And then in the new emerging roles, lots around ethics. I mean, somebody was saying to me, how do you performance manage a robot? And can you give a robot a final written warning for, poor behavior? But there's a whole, the sort of social and ethics side is changing. Productivity and ways of measuring and driving productivity are becoming critical. Stakeholder relations, again, coming into that whole customer centricity, and then wellness, which we spoke about a few slides ago, which is around that whole holistic. So how do you keep the organization well? How do you keep the actual people that work for you well? And that's, as we say, multidimensional in terms of what we're looking at. And even on this list, I think since we prepared these slides, is to say, the number of roles that are emerging there is growing all the time, and we just see all of these new jobs popping up that weren't there a little while ago. So part of the question you need to ask yourself is, so which are the roles, again, coming back to the priorities that are really disrupted in our environment, which are the ones that are in high demand and emerging? And do we have people to fill those high demand jobs and those emerging jobs? And if not, do we have a plan of how we're going to make sure that we can take some of those people from the disruptive component? Can we upskill them and retrain them and put them into some of these high demand and emerging jobs? And I'm going to share with you just sort of an example of how one can do that. I think also we're seeing, how workforces are structured and how tasks are distributed. We're seeing a lot more around, employees, I can never get that word right, about, where employees are actually using their job to start to generate business ideas. We're looking at a much more agile labor force, so you're starting to see a lot more around sort of your gig and agile labor force. I think also, starting to look at, insourcing. Where you can add tasks that can be insourced rather than using a third party to enhance that the experience of the customer. Again, as you can see, always coming back to this whole thing around the experience, both from your people and from your customers' point of view. The employee experience, interestingly, is that we're finding that where there's greater agility, we also have greater increased productivity. And because we have greater agility, we've got a higher level of job satisfaction and engagement because there's a lot more scope. And also with increased productivity is that you're able to then get innovation out at speed, and that allows you to remain competitive. What we're seeing now, just is from a CEO's perspective, is to say, we know that the technology is coming, and how do you close those gaps? So just having a look at part of our global CEO surveys, to say 49% of CEOs are saying, I believe that the answer to that lies within my own organization. So 49% of them are saying we need to reskill and upskill our own people, with only 18% coming from the outside of the industry. You've obviously got graduates and then, hiring from competitors. But really the main focus is to say, how do we close that gap? And that's really around making sure that we don't have to pay severance to our own people. We keep them employed, and we make sure that the organization moves forward. I think also, just to say, if we are going to have an upskilling initiative, I think it's important that we don't just go on sort of a blanket upskilling journey, but that we actually start to put some financial scorecards in place, in terms of, sort of the customer experience, the digital brand in terms of the stakeholders. Under financial, you are able to put quite a lot of nice measurements in there. And then on the people side and the people metrics is also really having a look at, what are your skills and development, your employees' learning experience, building the digital skills, and obviously looking at innovation. And, we can unpack those in a bit more detail at a later stage. So that's very much around, what does that future workforce look like? What I wanted to share with you is just quite an interesting case study, and it might not be as easy to see on the screen, but Luxembourg is a very interesting country in that it's I think it is the smallest country in Europe, but they have a massive shortage of skills, and one of their challenges is that they actually have positive unemployment. So that's a very nice problem to have as a country. But what they realized is that if they didn't put a plan together, they were not going to remain sustainable as an investment hub and as a place for organizations to run their businesses. So they embarked on a very ambitious upskilling program. And what they did is they got all the ministers of education, labor, and economy, and they said, well, what are the skills that we're going to need going forward as a country? And how do we help to identify those jobs that are at risk and start to get those people trained up to be able to go into an upskilling program where they can be made ready for these new changes that are coming. So they used funding from government, and then they used funding from private sector. So there's a story that they got 100 CEOs and kind of locked them in a room and said, you can't leave until we have agreement. But basically what they did is they got all those CEOs to agree to invest the other 50%. And then they started to create what those careers of the future were, and how if I am now an operator on the line, what would be the closest match for me in terms of some of those new jobs, and then putting them into a standardized training program where you came from all different organizations, and that helped everyone to get upskilled to be one of those new roles. So, for example, a senior test analyst or a programmer or, a release engineer. But they basically created what they called a skills bridge. And that was to take them from where they are now with their skills that are becoming coming out of date, and how do we build a bridge for them to get them to the new skills of the future. And those are the 6 steps of upskilling. We worked with the Luxembourg government on this project, and it was really around saying, so what do you need to do? That analytic data point first. What does your future workforce need to look like? How do we compare from a competency base and a capability base against that future workforce? And then how do we match people to those new roles? And how do we train people up to those new competencies that we're going to need? And then it's obviously around monitoring and evaluating the program. But those are the key steps that we took in that particular case. And obviously has had a massive impact in terms of making sure that people in Luxembourg remain relevant, remain future fit, and also remain employed, which is really useful. And I think that it could have a program like this could have a fantastic impact in any of one of our countries. So that's just quite an interesting case study. Also, I think what we saw there was around, the learning in a digital world. So it's also around saying, what are the job profiles and the competencies that we're going to need in the future, mapping people against that, doing some global comparison, and being able to, match those profiles and those competencies, and then obviously come up with a route that you can take to obviously do that. So you need to know what you need in the future to enable me to do my job, because it's going to be different in the future. And how does that then help me to transform this business? So this whole learning in this digital world is going to become even more important. These are just some examples of, some of the, you can see their technical professional, you can see what some of the competencies are, and you can have a look at what level the person's at and where they need to be, etc. And one's able to take all of this information, against the competencies. Where am I as a person in terms of my proficiencies? So I know how to do it, I apply it, or I live it. Where am I on that? And then, sort of developing learning paths for people in terms of, right, if I need to move from this role, what do I need to know how to do? And you'll see some competencies and capabilities on the left there. So, what I need to go on in order to just know, to just apply it or to live it. And that enables you to put together specific learning journeys for people. So I might, in fact, on a competency, only need to know how to know. I only need to know about it. I don't need to be able to apply it or live it. So therefore, I don't need to go through the same amount of development. So really creating learning paths according to that. And that then allows you to have your course offerings and your training and development offerings, your talent plans, classified according to, I know, I apply, I live, as an example of what we've done. What does it enable you to do, etc. And one can have that for all the roles. So having said all that, what does that mean for HR, and what does that mean for the people who are sitting on the call? And I suppose if ever there was an exciting time to be in HR, I think it's now. And I think that, what we're seeing is that, yes, we are getting more automation coming in and replacing human tasks, but we also know that there are still going to be roles for people. In fact, automation actually creates more jobs than it ever destroys because of the new roles coming on. So if we take HR today, managed by specialist teams, we do have technology that enable our HR management programs. The company employees are wanting long-term careers with us. And there are various dashboards and descriptive benchmark analytics that we have in place. And look, some organizations have some of this, some of them don't have all of it yet, but they're certainly on a journey. What we're saying going forward and where we see HR going is really around it's starting to be immersed in the business. So rather than being a standalone on the side, and then very much a tech-enabled, cloud-based ecosystem that has the ability to share data between various systems, and a workforce that, instead of looking for one long-term career, are looking to have various career experiences. And that may or may not be within one organization, but they are wanting to not just start in your organization and studying, get their first job in what they studied and stay in that field. So I studied finance, I stay in finance for the whole of my life. There's going to be a requirement to have quite flexible career paths and talent options. And then very much around starting to look at predictive and prescriptive analytics, where we're able to use some of the algorithms and the AI that sits behind it to say, let's look at past behavior and let's be able to put it forward and to see what impact that's going to have on us going into the future. So, for example, if I just keep employing like I am, what is my transformation going to look like? Am I going to reach my targets that I've set for myself in 3 years? Predictive analytics now allows us to look at information from the past and put that in going forward and actually make data-driven predictions around the type of HR that needs to happen in the future. So there really is a shifting focus. And I mean, I think these are the 4 big areas in terms of looking at HR going forward. So talent acquisition and retention, and it's not just about getting the right person in the door. It's also around what is it that employee experience like to work for you? So, do your roles support work-life balance? And, are you able to have more flexible employment models in this gig economy? So if you've got meaningful opportunities, you're going to have the ability to attract and retain the best people. Yes, reward will always be there, but it's around, does my job have meaning? Does it resonate with me as a human being? The second big area of focus is around HR tech and the analytics and the automation. So, gone are the days of running everything on spreadsheets, but it's very much around making those data-based decisions and, allowing the HR function to walk that journey with business and making sure that you're tracking data in the same way that the rest of the business is. The people development, which most probably ties in quite nicely to the talent acquisition and retention as well, is also around, creating more and more development opportunities, more transparency on performance management. And I think, also things around career mobility rather than just the old traditional succession planning, but also that people are looking for a very different learning experience that is going to develop them faster. And so that again ties back into what your training and development stuff needs to look like. And then lastly, the total rewards, which is around, how do you optimize the operating model, going back to the whole thing about an agile type of organizational design, and then using different types of benefits as part of your reward program. So what are the preferences of the people who work for you, and making sure that your reward packages are aligned to that. So we're busy at the moment running, an employee preference survey, and part of what that looks like is, tell us what you really want. Tell us what your preference is. And that applies to total rewards as well. Different people may value different components of their reward package differently. So the one size fits all, I think, for all of these, has fallen away. And it's very much around creating an EVP, taking into account these 4 key areas, that is customizable, and not a one-size-fits-all EVP for every single person in the organization. I think if we talk about what the roles look like of the future, remember we said that they were very much around specialized roles in the past. So we're really saying you need to be a people cultivator, so understanding and the ability to develop talent. A flexible navigator, so that ability that when the business changes tack and track, that you as an HR person are able to then take your interventions and to customize it to the direction that the business is going in. A business promoter, and when we talk about maximizing business value, what we're talking about there is really around, being able to do something in an HR space, but that it adds value to the bottom line of the organization, and that we're able to articulate that. The digital accelerator, I think very much around getting the mindset right for this whole digital world. And then culture, which is a real glue that keeps everything together, is around defining and promoting what is this organization's DNA. So quite different roles, and maybe as you're sitting here, you might be asking yourself, well, which one of those roles would I like to be? And I suppose in some organizations you can be a little bit of each, but you can see that there's quite a shift in terms of the way in which we communicate, the way in which we need to position HR and our strategies, etc. And an interesting stat just out of the CEO survey was when they interviewed, I think, over 10,000 leaders, it was 41% of the HR team said they think they're on track and they've got what it takes to deliver, but only 25% of business leaders, so the CEOs, actually felt that HR was at the level that it needed to be. So what we are seeing is that there is a need for HR people to actually step up and actually get onto what we call get onto the same page as business, in order to be able to, navigate this new world of work that we find ourselves in. And I think there's a lovely quote here by Carol Stubbings, who is one of the joint leads of our global P&O team. And it's really around saying you need to take a lead and tell your own story, build a narrative about what this future of world of work looks like for your organization and its people. And I think if you've got that narrative in place, it's going to make it a very exciting space for people to come and work in, because it's going to be, the world's uncertain. There's been lots of changes. There are challenges, but my company's got it. They've got a plan. They know what they're doing. There's direction, there's structure, there's strategy. And I think that's definitely one thing that if I could recommend to you is that you're starting to develop that narrative and you're starting to share that narrative if you're not doing that already within the organization. And then I think just some global trends and themes that we're seeing is really around that employee and the customer experience. Obviously being able to optimize the delivery capability. And there, when we talk about onshoring, it's also about being able to do some things, out of country, if that makes sense. The acceleration and the impact of technology, different ways of working. So I think a business partner role is changing, centers of excellence, etc. Innovations in the service model, and then, evolving core capabilities. So very much around workforce planning, making sure that you know what skills you're going to need going forward, and how do you get your people to go there in terms of walking the journey with you. So these are global insights, but I think very relevant to us sitting either in Namibia or in South Africa or on the African continent, because all of these things are affecting us as well. It's not just about that's what's happening in the global space, but we don't have to worry about that yet. I think COVID has taught us that. And then just, agile HR is another one in terms of being able to support a lot more an agile delivery function, the center of expertise as an idea, service teams for economies of scales, cross-functional teams, and then, component teams. And then just some of those capabilities that we believe are really important in the HR function going forward. And so what does HR need to be doing? Really around modernizing from a digital perspective and your strategy, improving the employee experience, which we've spoken a bit about today, which also ties in the culture component, and then also just looking at that workforce strategy. So, those are sort of three sort of future fit projects that need to be in place in terms of making sure that HR is ready to partner with business as we move into this future world of work. I'm just going to skip through that. Yeah, and then I think maybe just just to close off, and then we can discuss. Is really around. It's about finding the right model that works for your organization between outsourcing and tech, and how you what you put together in a centralized function, or what you have in a decentralized structure. It's very much around finding what works for you as an organization. So I'm going to just pause there and stop sharing my screen so that I can maybe see some faces, and just see if there's some comment or questions or anything you'd like to just unpack a little bit. So it's been quite high level, and I know it's been quite fast, but I think the idea was just to try and give you a little bit of an idea of what's out there, what's happening, what are organizations busy focusing their attention on.
I think, Maura, something that I'm struggling with at the moment, just listening to the presentation and looking at some of the context, is it feels like a lot of what we've heard now and what I've seen, for me, feels very linear. So we sort of talk about A plus B equals C, and I struggle to see this research and these insights and how it sort of plays into the interconnectedness of the rest of the organization, into the country as a whole, sort of seeing your business as a system, a subsystem within other systems. So your national context, the socio-economical context, the environmental context, and sort of understanding how do all of these things link. What influences this? What does this have an influence on, so that we can start seeing the longer term, bigger picture and the impact of these changes we might be making now in business. What could it possibly lead to in the next 10 years? So that 10 years from now, business professionals and HR professionals don't say, but what the hell were these people in HR thinking of 10 years ago? Because look at the crap that we have to deal with now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of where I struggle to find the connect. When you start talking about agile, I sort of start seeing things like analyzing, so taking complex things and breaking them up into smaller parts to analyze them, because it helps you deal with the complexity. But that to me leads me to think, so how do we do that while still ensuring that we see the forest and the trees? So not losing sight of the bigger picture with these ad hoc agile teams. Yeah, so those are just sort of the things that are going through my mind at the moment.
Yes.
With this sort of information. I see you talk about sort of network structures, and that makes a little bit sense. And earlier in the presentation, you mentioned a feedback loop, which sort of then speaks to systems thinking, but the rest of the concepts are very opposite to systems thinking, and it is a lot more linear.
So I think part of what I think one would need to understand, just so is to say, around, what is the broader macro environment. So let's just take Namibia as the country in point. So I think it's very much understanding, what is the Namibian landscape in terms of this future of work, and again, I think we would very much say, well, let's have a look at that we always like to look at things from a fact point of view. And where's the country going, and what are the challenges the country's facing? And then it's obviously to bring that into an organizational context of saying, well, all right, if that's our broader macro social, that's a little bit around that triangle that I showed you. If that's sort of our environment, and we are a Namibian company, I think you said the biggest private employer in the country, and with that comes a responsibility, because I think people would most probably watch what you do and how you do it, and maybe mirror some of that. So I think that you'd need to then say, as a responsible organization in Namibia, given the challenges, given where everything's going, given what we need to achieve as an organization, what does that look like for ONL? And then start to, from there, work out, all right, so then, so what does that mean for us as an organization, both internally and externally? And what are the strategic things that we need to drive that are going to get us to that point? So if you take, for example, I just want to talk around the upskilling one, because I think it's quite a nice integrated one, is to say, automation technology is something that's going to impact your whole country and your whole organization. What is your strategy around upskilling? But it's not just an upskilling strategy that sits all by itself and it goes in a linear line, because depending on what that is, it's going to influence all of your other HR practices. So if we're saying, we need to embark on an upskilling program because we know that we're going to have jobs that are going to fall away, we want people to remain employed, that then starts for me to touch on every component of HR that you have, across the whole organization. So it talks to all of those HR processes, and how do they interconnect and relate, and how do they support each other, so that you don't have siloed approaches of, so let's just take you're on an upskilling program, but now you want to look at your rewards program. Whatever you're doing on your rewards program has to support what is going on in your upskilling program. So there needs to be that kind of interconnectedness. I'd almost think that it's not quite like spaghetti, but they all do have touch points into each other, and not sort of separate work streams that are running like that. And I think that's where, in a way, when you run from an agile perspective, that's where I would see some of that cross-pollination of ideas happening in could be quite a creative way of looking at some of the solutions. It talks to your concern, Amaray.
Yeah, no, it does. I think something that I am currently exploring and very interested in, and very concerned about, I think, more in the HR space is the impact we have on things outside of HR that isn't as easily seen or as noticeable, because there isn't a direct line of sort of causality. And I mean, I like to use the example of one of our companies just went through a negotiation with their workers to try and convince them to work during a month that is traditionally considered as a production shutdown month.
Mm-hmm.
And the ER team keeps sort of talking about this one solution they implemented where they gave each employee a box of fish, and that was helpful in convincing them to work for the month. But then my sort of concern comes in, but what does that trigger? Because the things we've implemented over the last 20 years in HR, whether it is in talent or in recruitment or in wage negotiations or whatever, a lot of the solutions we implemented 10, 20 years ago are the things that are now the problems that we need to solve, because they had really long-term impact that was unseen and undiscovered. And that's sort of what I'm trying to figure out is, how do we move HR to the space where we don't use the same thinking that created the problems 10 years ago. We don't use that same thinking now, again, in implementing solutions that might have repercussions 10 years from now. So how do we develop those sort of skills and capabilities in our business that we can look at unintended consequences, what could possibly happen? So that skill and just that thinking approach in our HR teams, instead of just, but let's implement the solution, this is the immediate impact it has, it sounds great for the business, let's do it, but really thinking further and wider and deeper and longer term.
No, and look, I think, and I mean, I think that would be a very interesting conversation for us to pick up. And I think I have a colleague who is quite a guru in terms of that kind of scenario, because it's a bit of scenario thinking, design thinking capability that you're looking for. But it's around being able to, look, we can't predict the future, but it's around, let's say, taking educated decisions, but with forethought to what some of those downsides of those could be. Because I agree with you. I think often I've been in a wage negotiation and I've sat there and thought, how on earth did somebody agree to this? This is ridiculous. I mean, I had a client where, when your mother retired or your father retired from the factory floor, the child got the job. So your child came into the job. With a net effect that if you've listened to your parents moaning for the last 30 years about how terrible it is to work at O&L, and now how do you have an engaged person arriving when that's all that they've been fed, around the kitchen table? So, I get your point there. I think it's a little bit around sort of the design thinking, the capability that you're trying to build in those HR teams, as well as looking how can we use analytics to start to look at some kind of predictive base of what would this do if we did it? So what is the likelihood based on past behavior if we used it? And that's where I say I'd like to have a conversation with you, with Bernice, is what, can we use some kind of predictive analytics that not as in I'm saying you can't always predict what's coming, but to give us some kind of a view of what are some of the ramifications of some of these decisions?
Yeah, I must say, honestly, I'm not convinced that analytics can give us that, because for me, the focus is really less on the things and more on the relationships between things. And I don't think that is something that you can really predict accurately with an algorithm. Humans aren't ants. Nor do we act like ants, nor do we socialize like ants. And for me, the big shift is really moving away from analyzing towards synergizing. And for me, in new skills, new ways of working, that seems to be something that we should really be focusing on in the business. I think we've tried to make sense of complex things and dynamic complexity quite a lot over the last few years, and our answer to that has been to analyze, break things up into smaller pieces. But if you break an elephant into 2 pieces, you're not getting 2 small elephants.
Yeah.
You're getting something that doesn't make sense because you've broken the relationships between things. And that is really something that I think we need to sink our teeth into and figure out, how do we cause a shift or a movement in business so that we, instead of analyzing and looking at these small chunks and then talking to people to make sure that we don't operate in silos, but how do we really move towards synergizing and looking at the coherent whole, not just in your business, but in your country, globally, etc.
Yeah.
But I suppose, sorry, I mean, those are just really more the concepts that I am currently struggling with and trying to figure out, how do we sort of incorporate them into business and our plans and our strategies and our new ways of working.
Yeah. But I think there's quite a discussion to be had there, Amore, because I think, and I'm just talking about what goes on in PwC, and I'm just thinking about how our ways of working have changed, and very much moved to, when we talk agile, just in terms of the way we put teams together, the way that teams are empowered to create some of that synergy. So, I mean, we're working on a sort of a project at the moment, a campaign. And in that team, we've got people who basically know nothing or very little about the subject matter, okay? But because they think differently to us. So rather than being 10 HR people in the room, we've actually created teams where you're almost looking, and I'm sitting on one of those teams to think, I don't know what I'm doing in this group, but I think I'm put there because I look at things through a different lens. I come at things from a different angle. And that I think is a way that we've used, let's say, agility to try and create a little bit more combustion, if I could put it to you like that, in the discussions and in the brainstorming. So that might be a little bit of, I think, what you're sort of alluding to in terms of how do you start to create that as a culture within the organization, because then you could get quite different results coming out.
Yeah.
But yes, it is a look. I agree with you that I don't think analytics are the be all and end all of everything. I think they are, like anything, an indication. It's almost like a psychometric test is a good indicator. It gives you useful information, but it's not the solution to whether you should appoint somebody into the role or not. You want to take all of the information that you gather, and you want to then make a decision, with all of those sort of insights. And I think that's maybe a little bit around, how do you use the good of analytics and not become fixated on it, and then enhance it with some of the, let's say, the more real relational pieces of information that one's got. And I suppose that comes back to, at the end of the day, what is that people strategy? So, is the people strategy sitting and saying, this is what we want to achieve, this is what we want our organizational DNA to be? And if we can define that aspirational DNA, because it might not be that at the moment. So then, how would people behave, and how would we work, and what would we do, and how would it be different? And then what's that going to deliver? Is it going to give us something 1 + 1 is 3 rather than the 1 + 1 is 2? So something, around that sort of, how do you create that DNA?
I think that's definitely something that, and we had the conversation again this morning, a skill that we are struggling to find, and that there's a really significant gap in our business, is the insights portion to the analytics. Because I mean, data analytics is worthless if you don't have proper insights that you can draw from them. And it seems like we have across Namibia, I'm not sure about South Africa, we have a lot of data analysis skills and analytic skills,
Yeah.
But then somebody being able to look at that data, see the interconnectedness between that and other pieces of data, and then really effectively be able to draw insights from that.
Yeah.
I think that is sort of, for me, the glue between data analytics and strategy.
No,
and that's something that we definitely struggle with, that we don't have.
Yeah, look, you and every other country, I think so. You know, you can find, we can find, let's say, geeks who can do those analytics, the analytical side, but the ability to be able to say, well, what does this mean? What's the insight? How does this help us? You know, what is it telling us? Is it even relevant? Yes, it looks impressive because it's on a lot of graphs, but and I think that, you know, if one can find a way to have meaningful analytics, and those insights, and you can apply those insights into your people strategy, for example, then I think you could land up with a very meaningful people strategy, you know, DNA, culture, because then you kind of pulling it all together.
Yeah.
But good discussion, and Maria, I'm happy to, you know, pick it up again with you, you know, in a bit more detail if you'd like to, you know, unpack it, and I can get some of the clever heads around the table, and we could have a little bit of a session if that's something that would be of value, you know, to you guys.
Yeah, sure. I think we have a session with our HR managers next week where we are going to do a little bit of systems analysis around our people strategy and our structures going forward. And I think it might be useful to have a conversation with you guys after that with the insights we got from that session.
Yeah, that would be great. With absolute pleasure.
But Jimmy, I've now hogged your meeting for long enough. You guys have the floor. I'll keep quiet.
Now, Maria, you're welcome to ask more or to share more. I think the presentation is a lot more in the space of I think talent and stuff like that. But I did pick up something, and maybe just a general question. There's no right or wrong answer. If one look at total rewards, you guys alluded to the fact that one needs to start looking in terms of what type of benefits will benefit certain people or the people of today. But I think we still have a very traditional approach when it comes to benefits, because we still needed to have a parental role when it comes to certain things. And I think in Africa, and I'm generalizing here, in Africa, I think that there is still a role that the employer needs to play predominantly. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around in terms of how will we be making that shift to move away from a parental role in terms of total rewards and to a more flexible approach in terms of identifying the needs of what the current people have, and especially when it comes to your talent people or highly skilled or high talent, because remember, they want to be rewarded totally different.
So I think, I mean, I suppose the old question is education, but I think, Jimmy, the other thing that we are seeing in the market is also around, you know, people are wanting to have a lot more of their preference reflected in their total rewards. And I think it's about, we need to understand what those preferences are for different people, because it's not a one size fits all in terms of those benefits, and how can you as an organization optimize them. I think what I'm hearing is around the responsibility of people who may be, you know, don't have the right level of, let's say, maturity to be able to make some of those decisions themselves. I think that's a process that one has to go on. But I think if you remain very traditional, you're going to have a lot of challenge and a lot of difficulty in attracting the talent that you're looking for. So that approach might work well for, let's say, the more junior level. But if you, come back to Amore's example around, you know, the data analytics and the insight, you know, you can't attract somebody to that kind of job with a very patriarchal type of reward structure. You know, they're used to working in an environment where there's a lot more influence that they can have. It doesn't cost the organization anymore, but it's about how it's packaged.
No, definitely. And I think with us, which makes it a bit more complex, but also a bit more fun as well, is if you look at the demographics of our employees. I mean, from the fishing industry, right to manufacturing, right to retail, across a lot of spheres. And I think in the in the reward space, for especially for Danica, and for us, it's going to be a good challenge, or a nice challenge, in order to really find an optimal total rewards benefit at the end of the day.
So maybe just you know, I mean, I think again, I'm a big believer, and you know, around when we're looking at rewards, about not having the one size fits all. And I think that if you say you've got people in the fishing industry, to retail, to this, to that, you can't expect to, you know, obviously I'm sure you don't have what people need in those roles, in those industries, is also completely unique. And what's market best practice in those industries also is something different. I think the important thing is that, you know, are people getting what they believe they need to have? So in other words, are you, and I'm just going to use a flippant example, are you providing a gym to people who actually are not interested in going to any kind of fitness exercise because we feel that it's a good thing to do? Because that's what we read somewhere, you know, that all good companies provide a gym. And I'm being very flippant in the example. But, you know, whereas people might actually say, you know, if you're wasting your money. So how do you optimize your total rewards? And we've got a process, Jimmy, that we run, where we do have a look at your whole reward structure and say, looking at people's preferences, are you getting the best bang for your buck? Because if you're putting 100 Rand into my gym account every month, but it means absolutely nothing to me, then you're actually wasting your 100 Rand. You could do better to put that same 100 Rand somewhere else, or alternatively, not to put it anywhere. And I think that's where one has the ability to marry what is the preference of people who work for you, and what are they looking for, and then what are you actually giving, and what is the gap? You know, so that might be something worth having a look at. On the bottom end of the hierarchy, we know that and I mean, I would imagine in the fishing industry, for example, I've done quite a lot of work in the squid industry. You know, what people are looking for there is a very different remuneration model. In fact, very different HR practices as well. So disciplinary processes are quite a challenge in the fishing industry. So what you can do on a boat is not what you can do in an office. You know, there again, I think it's also around having this, although you've got an overarching people strategy for ONL, you know, how do you have the ability to localize it, if I could put it to you like that? Something around, you know, along those terms.
No, definitely. Maybe I just... if I can get more information around your employee preference survey. Do you do it for third parties as well?
Yes. What do you mean third parties, as in for yourselves? Yes. No. Yes. Yeah. No. So we do it for clients. It's actually something that we're running quite hard with now. And we're running with it throughout EMEA. So it's going to also give us some nice data. You know, so you also have sort of global benchmarks. But I definitely can send you some information around the employee preference.
Definitely, because I think, and I'm generalizing again, in Africa, we don't have a lot of inside information with regards to that, because I've been reading, for example, in Asia, they are more leaning towards, you know, things like elderly care, for example, and I know that the return on investment is quite high among employees there, but in Africa, I haven't came across any or a lot of insights into what's happening in the African space.
So it's a brand new, if I could say it, it's a brand new initiative. I think we're the only organization running anything in this space. So it is something that we're going to, you know, we're building now, because we've identified it as being something that's important. But I mean, you take Asia, that's most probably a huge ROI because of an aging population. In Africa, we have the opposite problem. So this ties into your broader environment, Amaray, is that in Africa, we have a youth problem. we've got too many young people. So if you are now going and offering, geriatric care and you're operating in Africa, it's not going to win you any points in terms of your reward offering. So I think it would be a very interesting, and one would be able to also almost slice and dice it for you according to the different organizations and industries that you operate in, and then one could consolidate it into an overall view for ONL. And it might be interesting to see what are the preferences in fishing versus retail, versus property versus. And then aggregate that information. And then, as you say, Amore, what is the insight around that? What does that mean for the people strategy of ONL?
Yeah.
And then you can make, then you can design stuff that makes sense for your organization. And in that space, just because you're sitting in the talent space, I mean, that's a survey that one can run with people who are not employed by ONL. So you could, say we want to take this survey to all the universities or to wherever you recruit from. We want the youth to fill the survey out because we want to know what our prospective employees want, not what the current. It's good to know what the current ones want, but what about the potential? What about the people who are going to make a decision and they're in second year university or third year university and they've now got to choose an employer? And how do we compare on an EVP basis based on that? So
that would be insightful.
But I'll send you something, Jimmy.
Yes, that'll be great, Maura.
Okay. Sorry, and I must just say, the topic on New World, New Skills and Future of Work is so broad, as you can imagine, that, I know it did have a bit of a talent focus and a skills focus, but it does touch on absolutely every part of the HR value chain. And I think, I could most probably keep talking to you for days on this topic. So very happy if we want to, pick up something a little bit more precise. It's just often hard to know kind of just quite where to pitch it. Oh, have I lost everybody?
I'm still here.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maura, for the presentation and the insights. And thanks for inviting me, Jimmy.
Sorry, my mic was off. New age problems. But yeah, thank you very much, Maura. I will also have a check-in with Danica. She's our group reward manager. Yes. And yeah, so I'll just check in with her as well, and then and please share with us those insights as well that you mentioned as well.
Yes, I will do 100%.
Thank you.
All right.
Baltrud and Mimi, anything from your side?
Seems everyone's having connectivity. Well, Jude, if you're talking, you're on mute. As you said, Jimmy, new age problems. Yeah,
but thank you very much for the insights. They've got problems, knowledge.
Okay.
But thank you very much. We will definitely, also, like I mentioned, I will have a discussion with Danica, and then we will revert back to you as well if we need any further information or any assistance.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Altude. Thanks, Mami. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.